Good evening. I am the committee chair, Stephanie Hill, and on behalf of committee members and staff, I would like to welcome you to the March 5, 2024 City of Roseville Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee meeting. This 5-member committee is charged with the annual review and report to the City Council on the revenue and expenditures of funds from the General Transactions and Use Tax, known as Measure B, that was passed by voters on November 6, 2018. I will now call the meeting to order. Terry, please call roll.
Chair Hill,
Here.
Committee Member Betancourt. Here. Committee Member Bunnell.
Here.
Committee Member Kitchell. Here. Committee Member Spate. Here. All members are present.
Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. This part of the agenda, public comment, is for anyone who would like to address the committee on any item not listed on tonight's agenda. The Brown Act does not permit action on items discussed during public comment. When addressing the committee, please stand at the podium, state your name for the record, and limit your comments to 3 minutes. Any public comment at this time? Seeing none, we'll close public comment and move on to item 5, approval of minutes. This item is approval of the minutes of the March 30th, 2023 meeting of the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee. Are there any comments from the committee? Are there any public comments? Do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Approved minutes of March, what was it?
March 30,
March
2023.
30th meeting.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Committee Member Spate, seconded by Committee Member Kitchell to approve the minutes of the March 30th, 2023 meeting of the Local Sales Tax Committee, Citizens Oversight Committee. That is a lot of words. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion is passed. Staff, this is me again. Staff recommends, we're item 6.1, appointment of chair and vice chair. Staff recommends the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee take action to appoint a chair and vice chair for the committee to serve until December 31, 2024. Attorney Joe?
Hi, good evening, everybody. We, on this item, are going to select a new chair and vice chair. Our procedures say that at the beginning of each year, we will select a new chair and vice chair to go until the end of the year. And so this item we're going to select a chair first and go through that whole process first, and then we will select the vice chair. So kind of what we're going to do is, after I'm done talking, we're going to open it up, and you can either nominate someone else, you can nominate yourself for who you would like to have as chair, and then we will take public comment on that. And then after public comment, we will see if anyone wants to make a motion to appoint someone as the chair. We'll go through, have a second, go through the voting on that and have a chair. And then we'll go through the same exact process to do the vice chair after that. And so a couple of things I wanted to note are the chair can still be the chair. That's okay to do as well. And if anybody else has any questions before we get started, we can see if anyone has any interest.
Are there any questions or comments from the committee? Are there any public comments on this item? I'm just going to keep looking at you, sorry.
Okay, so would anyone have an interest in nominating anyone else for chair or self-nomination for the chair?
If no one else wants it, I can continue and then pass on next year with our new folks. But if anyone wants to step in, happy to step back.
Okay.
I'll nominate you.
Thanks. Are there any other nominations or volunteers? Okay. Do I have a commission to appoint Committee Member Hill as the chair of the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee? We have a motion by Committee Member Kitchell. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Committee Member Betancourt. That was like a test on the names. I got them all.
And we're going to do a roll call vote on
Yeah.
these ones as well. So can you do a roll call on these, Terry, instead of just all in favor, please? Thank you.
Terry, roll call vote, please.
Committee Member Betancourt.
Aye.
Committee Member Bunnell?
Aye.
Committee Member Hill?
Aye. Do I vote? I vote. Yes.
You can, yes.
Yes.
Member Kitchell?
Yes.
And Committee Member Spate?
Yes.
Excellent. Congratulations again, Chair Hill. Now we will move on to the vice chair position. So does anyone have an interest in being vice chair or nominating anyone else to be vice chair?
It's all yours.
I was gonna say, I'm happy to nominate you.
I am going to go ahead and nominate Committee Member Brunel as vice chair.
Okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It seems like you were, okay. Are there any other nominations or volunteers? Can I have a motion to appoint Committee Member Brunel as the vice chair?
I'm gonna pause that real quick. Committee Member Bunnell, I believe, nominated Committee Member Betancourt.
Oh, did he? I thought there was a
Yes.
discussion over who was nominating who. I apologize.
I will cede my,
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that.
no, I don't really want to be, I would prefer not to be a vice chair.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it.
Sorry, I missed that. They were to my
No,
side.
no problem.
All right.
Oh, okay, so now we have, now we can have a motion.
Perfect, thank you.
Would anyone like to make a motion to appoint Committee Member Bunnell as the vice chair?
I move to appoint Committee Member Brunel.
I will second.
Okay, great, and we're going to do a roll call vote for this one as well.
Committee Member Betancourt?
Yes.
Committee Member Bunnell?
Yes?
Chair Hill?
Yes.
Committee Member Kitchell?
Yes.
Committee Member Spate?
Yes.
Thank you. The motion has passed. I will now turn the meeting back over to myself to introduce the next item. Next item is 6.2, the Brown Act. We'll have a presentation by Joe Mandel, Senior Deputy City Attorney on the Brown Act.
Great. Thank you very much, Chair Hill and members of the committee. I do have a presentation tonight on the Brown Act and the California Public Records Act. By way of introduction, my name is Joe Mandel from the City Attorney's Office, and the presentation tonight on the Brown Act and the California Public Records Act is going to be brief, but these are two important laws that apply to this committee and all of the other boards and commissions and city council that are here in the city of Roseville. And so I wanted to do an overview tonight. I know we have a couple of new commissioners, but I also wanted to do a refresher for our existing committee members as well. So what is the Brown Act? The Brown Act is named after Ralph M. Brown, who is an assembly member who authored the bill back in the 1950s. And the Brown Act was all about transparency. And it's a group of these called sunshine laws, if you hear that word, which is like the legislature should be open to the public. The records should be open to the public. Politicians should disclose conflicts of interest. This was a real big push to have the public understand and know what actions that their elected officials and appointed officials are taking. So it was important that the legislative body, as part of the Brown Act, must meet in the open and no longer secretly, and that the public has the right to attend and participate in public meetings. So this is a law that's been in effect since the early 50s. And so who does the Brown Act apply to? So it does apply to a legislative body of a local agency, and I have 3 bullet points there, and that really summarizes what that statement means. The first one is it applies to the governing body of a city or county, and with that we're looking at city councils. Every city council of every city in the state of California is subject to this, as well as every county board of supervisors. So the Brown Act is an important law in California local politics. The second bullet point, the Brown Act applies to subsidiary bodies created by formal action. This is where it hits our committee. We are the Local Sales Tax Citizens Oversight Committee that was created by formal action when the voters approved Measure B, the half-cent sales tax increase. And so this would also apply to things like the Public Utilities Commission, the Library Board, all of the boards and commissions that we have here at the city. And then the third bullet point of a Brown Act legislative body that this would apply to is a standing committee with continuing subject matter jurisdiction. And an example of that is prior to doing our Measure B half-cent sales tax increase, we had a Community Priorities Advisory Committee that was 20-plus people on the committee, and they went through several meetings over several months to talk about what are the priorities in the community and to advise the city council on this is what the priorities are to the committee. Ultimately, city council approved putting a half-cent sales tax increase measure on the ballot in November of 2018. And so now here we are today as the Oversight Committee looking at all of those expenditures. So moving on, now that we know that the Brown Act applies to us, what do we have to do? So there's a couple of things we need to do. We need to provide the public with notice. And so notice of our meetings for a regular meeting, we have to post notice at least 72 hours in advance in a publicly accessible place. And if there's a special meeting for some reason, say there was an emergency or something like that, we can post notice 24 hours in advance. That is rare, and it is subject to city attorney approval on that. So when we post our notice 72 hours in advance here in Roseville, we're here at the Civic Center right now. There's a bulletin board outside that we post everything at. We post it on our website. We post it at all three of our libraries, MyDo, the Downtown Roseville Library, and Martha Riley Library at Mahaney. So easiest place to get it, though, is on our website. So we provide notice of all of our meetings, and then the next item is that we also provide everyone with notice and an agenda. So the agenda, what the agenda contains is a brief general description of each item of business that's going to be transacted and discussed at the meeting, so that someone, if they're reading, they get the notice and they read the agenda and they determine whether or not they want to attend and be a part of that meeting. So the agenda always has to have an opportunity for public comment, for people to talk about anything they want within the subject matter jurisdiction of that local body, including criticism. You cannot prohibit anybody from criticizing you about anything, so sometimes public comment can get interesting in various situations. And it's important to note that no action or discussion can take place on any item that's not posted on the agenda. So really important that only actions are the only items on the agenda. So the Brown Act applies to meetings, and a meeting is defined under the Brown Act as a congregation of a majority of the members of a legislative body at the same time and location to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action upon any item within the subject matter jurisdiction of the legislative body. It's a big definition, but a couple of words to pull out of there to keep focused on are a majority of the members at the same time and location hearing, deliberating, and talking about it. So we're thinking about a majority of us should not be doing that. So on the slide now is a type of meeting called a seriatim meeting. That is a prohibited type of meeting, and this is something to look out for. And this is, again, talking about how a majority of the commissioners outside of an authorized meeting shouldn't be talking about committee business. And so this is using a series of communications to sort of understand and deliberate and talk to each other. So examples of these things, the first bullet point there is the chain of communications, where committee member A talks to committee member B, then committee member B talks to committee member C, and everybody knows what's going on without specifically talking to each other. The other one is the hub of the wheel concept, where one member goes around and individually communicates to each one of the members so that now they know exactly what the positions of all of the other members are. That applies to us as staff as well. We're not supposed to be used as the intermediary between everybody to figure out what everyone's voting on. So it's important that we keep the public business in front of the public. The next item I did want to talk about is a new law that was passed in 2020 called AB Assembly Bill 992, and this relates to social media usage and Brown Act. So normally a single contact between a public official and another public official would not be prohibited, because like on this committee, we are a 5-member committee. If 2 of you got together, that would not be a majority and technically not a Brown Act violation. However, with regard to social media, if this occurs where one commissioner communicates on a social media platform in response to someone else, that can be considered a Brown Act violation, just that those two people communicating together. So on your social media, you should be focused on only answering questions, providing information to the public, soliciting information from the public about commission business. Moving on to the next slide. The middle bullet point is the most important note. If one public official comments on or reacts to another public official's social media post, that's a Brown Act violation. We're talking about commenting, retweeting, liking, disliking, an emoji, anything like that. So if someone posts something related to commission business on their social media, do not respond to it in any way, because that could be considered a violation of Assembly Bill 992. So what can you do? Again, you can answer questions to the public. You can provide information as long as you are not communicating any of the comments or the position of any of the other members if there is any sort of discussion going on. Again, transparency and operating in front of the public eye is extremely important throughout this entire process to us. So I also want to note that second bullet point on there, that emails concerning commission business are public records, even if they're sent on your personal device or from a personal account, like your Gmail account. So it's important to not use your personal accounts to conduct any city business, and I'll touch on that again in a moment. So what is not a meeting technically under the Brown Act? These are things that no Brown Act notice is required, no agenda needs to be published for these types of things. So the first bullet point, conferences that are open to the public that involve a discussion of issues of general interest, that's not considered a meeting under the Brown Act. The next one, open and publicized community meetings organized by organizations other than the local agency. Those are things like Arcona, our Roseville Coalition of Neighborhood Associations, or just an individual neighborhood association. If they had a meeting and all of you showed up, that wouldn't necessarily be a Brown Act violation, because that would fit under that second bullet point. The third bullet point, attending an open and noticed meeting of another body or local agency. That would be any one of our other boards and commissions, a city council meeting of a neighboring city, you could go to that. Next bullet point, attending a purely social or ceremonial occasion. These are, if all of you showed up at a wedding or a retirement party or something like that, that's not a Brown Act violation, as long as you're not discussing commission business and doing that in any way. And you can also attend any committee as an observer. And again, observer is mouth shut, no facial expressions. It's a very much a just listening role. If you violate the Brown Act, you could be subject to criminal penalties. It's important here, though, that to be guilty of violating the Brown Act, the committee has to take action where the member intended to deprive the public of information which you knew or should have known that the public was entitled to under the Brown Act. So there's very much a intent aspect to all of this as well, and there has to be actual action that does take place. But if that does happen, and has happened in many cases, you could be guilty of a misdemeanor. And so that's on the criminal side of things, but on the civil side of things, this is much more likely what would happen. A court could issue an injunction which would prevent future violations from Brown Act violations, and the district attorney or someone else could bring a civil action against the city. But the biggest thing that I look at is something like invalidation. So if there is a Brown Act violation on an action that we took, if something is not in substantial compliance with the Brown Act, it could be invalidated. And you think about things like passing a budget, but there was a Brown Act violation, or a project approval, or certifying election results, or something like that, where there's specific deadlines and important things. And if you have an action invalidated, that could be sort of catastrophic to your project. So that's a quick summary of the Brown Act. I'm happy to go into it in more detail if any of you have any questions at the end of it, but now I'm going to switch gears and talk real quick about the California Public Records Act. And again, this is all talking about transparency and keeping all of your communications open and available to the public. So under the California Public Records Act, which is in California Government Code Section 7931, et sec means and the following, so keep flipping pages. It's a thick section. The purpose of the California Public Records Act is really to give the public access to information. The legislature has declared that the public has a right to access this information. Our policy and general policy favors the disclosure of information. There's very narrowly construed exceptions for when you can keep public information out. And so we typically will err on the side of disclosing because that is what we would like to do with providing more transparency. So the next, okay, great. These bullet points are important because I want you to realize that any emails concerning committee business are public records. They're public records even if they're sent on your personal device or from your personal account. And so we recommend not using your personal devices to conduct city business. And so what we sort of recommend is if you create a separate Gmail account that's only used for this sort of committee business, or just keep it to committee business, because it is possible that emails are subject to disclosure, and it would be emails beyond what just your commission emails are. It could be, your whole personal device is gone through to search for stuff. And so that has happened. If you want to Google, there's a case involving the city of San Jose where there was some interesting facts in that whole case related to disclosure of information on a personal account. So a final note of caution. Just remember that a majority of the members cannot discuss local sales tax citizens oversight committee business among themselves. There shouldn't be any sort of serial meetings going on. Be careful with your social media posts, with commenting and making emojis. Avoid email forwards and reply to alls. That's a thing that happens quite a bit, is sometimes there can be an email that goes out to everybody and someone hits reply to all, and that technically is a Brown Act violation because you're communicating with the rest of the group. So we try to keep a hold on that and BCC everyone so you can't do that. But just important because we've had other commissioners, you sort of forward something around and say, hey, I found this article that I thought was really great and I wanted to send it to the group, and then I will have to admonish everyone that don't respond to that. So if anyone has any questions, you're always welcome to seek advice from the city attorney's office. Again, my name is Joe Mandel. You're welcome to call me. You're welcome to call any of the attorneys in our office. We're happy to help. We're all Brown Act experts. So with that, back to you, Chair Hill.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the committee?
No.
Are there any public comments on this item? Thank you, Joe, for your presentation. This item was for information only, and no action by the committee is required. So we're now going to move on to agenda item 6.3, which is our committee overview, which will be presented by Dennis Kaufman, Assistant City Manager, Chief Financial Officer for the committee overview.
All right. Good evening, Committee Chair Hill and committee members. My name is Dennis Kaufman. I'm the Assistant City Manager and Chief Financial Officer for the City of Roseville. And I'll be presenting on the following 3 agenda items. And along with me tonight is Scott Pettengill, the city's Assistant Finance Director, who's going to help with the next presentation. Our first agenda item tonight is an overview of this committee. Since we have a couple new committee members, I wanted to review the purpose of the committee, the current committee members and terms, an overview of the Measure B sales tax, and the specific duties that are in the committee charter that were established by the City Council. So first, the purpose of the committee is the annual review and report to the City Council on the revenue and expenditures of the Measure B sales and use tax. And this committee was established as part of the ballot measure that was approved by the voters of Roseville. On the next slide is a list of our current committee members and the end dates of their terms. I want to welcome Bob and Jordan, and welcome back, Kathy. And thank you all for volunteering for service on this committee. So our Measure B sales tax is a half-cent local sales and use tax that was approved by the voters to protect Roseville's essential services. It was approved in the November 6, 2018 election, and it went into effect on April 1st, 2019. The sales and use tax rate in Roseville increased from 7.25% to 7.75%, and it is still one of the lowest sales and use tax rates in the region and also throughout the state. There's always a lot of confusion about where all of our sales tax money goes, and so this slide breaks down the allocation of sales tax. You see the total rate down at the bottom. Majority of sales tax revenue collected within Roseville goes to the state of California for their budget. 0.25% goes to Placer County. The 1% Bradley Burns sales tax is the largest revenue source for the city's general fund that has existed for many decades. The local public safety sales tax, that 0.5%, goes to the county, and then it's distributed to the cities within the county, but the county retains most of it for public safety services. The city gets a little bit for police and fire. And then finally, we have the local B, Measure B sales tax of 0.5%. So Measure B is a general sales and use tax. It's not dedicated to a specific purpose, and that was the language in the ballot measure. It's a general fund revenue source, and it's budgeted similar to how we budget property tax and the Bradley Burns sales tax, which is that 1% sales tax. The general fund is the city's primary fund that we use to budget and account for city services that are not required to be reported in other funds. Things like police and fire and parks and recreation. And this means that Measure B revenue gets combined with property tax revenue and the Bradley Burns sales tax revenue to fund those general fund services like police, fire, and parks. General fund expenditures are budgeted at the discretion of City Council, and we'll talk about that a little bit, for any program or service within the general fund. Expenditures made with general tax revenues are not tracked separately, and we'll talk a little bit more about that also. The city budget is developed based on the city's council's priorities, and it reflects the intent of Measure B to maintain city service levels. So the Measure B sales tax, the allocation of sales tax gets a little complicated. And so I wanted to share a little bit about that. First of all, the word district shows up there in the first bullet. The local sales tax is considered a district tax just because the city is a subdivision of the state, and the state gives it a name, and it's a district tax. And it's imposed locally, but it's under state sales and use tax law. And the basis of the local tax is a little different than the rest of the sales tax, the Bradley Burns sales tax. The Measure B sales tax is generally applied to over-the-counter retail sales within the city, so a grocery store, a big box store. But it's a little different for retailers that sell vehicles or vessels or aircraft. And so I'm going to go into this a little bit because people ask us a lot about why the revenues don't act the same. You would think that the Measure B sales tax, which is 0.5%, would just be half of the 1% Bradley Burns sales tax, but the basis of the tax is a little bit different. If you go to the grocery store, you're going to pay both the Measure B 0.5-cent tax and you're going to pay the 1% Bradley Burns tax. But if you go to the Roseville Auto Mall and purchase a vehicle, the allocation is different depending on where you live. Because the local sales tax is destination-based. And so the two taxes are very different. So with Measure B, our top 10 sales tax generators are the big box retail stores and the large online marketplace, Amazon, whereas Bradley Burns, the primary 1% sales tax that the city receives, in that top 10, the big box stores are there, but also 6 of the auto mall retailers are in our top 10. And that's because at the auto mall, we collect the 1% Bradley Burns sales tax on all auto sales there. But for Measure B, because it's based on the destination, we get the Measure B sales tax only from car buyers who live in Roseville. If somebody from outside of Roseville is buying at the auto mall, we still get the 1%, but we don't get Measure B from them. So it's a little different. The base of the way the tax is calculated is a little complicated, which is really the main thing I wanted to point out in the fact that the two don't rise and fall at the same level. The Measure B sales tax is also applied to out-of-state businesses, and there's some complexities there with a $500,000 threshold. Like sales tax, if someone buys merchandise from out of state and is not charged sales tax by the vendor, then the person owes use tax. And that goes for the Bradley Burns as well as the Measure B sales tax. So that's a lot about how the tax works. This committee was established by the ballot measure, and the duties of the committee, as the city council established in the charter, is to annually review the revenue, receipts, and expenditures of the Measure B sales and use tax, and to annually review the status of programs and services funded wholly or partially with proceeds of Measure B, and to annually prepare and present a report to the city council regarding Measure B revenues and expenditures. And our last agenda item tonight will go over that step. And then you see there, as part of the committee charter, the city council made clear that it shall not be within the purview of this committee to direct staff or to recommend particular contracts or projects, services or service levels, and that those matters remain under the authority of the city council, the city manager, and staff. So those are the duties laid out in the committee charter. I wanted to highlight one area that I've covered that is a little challenging. As you can see, the duty of the committee is to review and report on the Measure B revenue and expenditures. But because the revenue is a general revenue and gets combined with property tax and the Bradley Burns sales tax, we can't track expenditures of general revenues by revenue source. And so to alleviate this problem, staff worked with the committee in prior years and developed the scorecard document that we've included in your agenda packet. We actually provided you a revised copy on your desk there that we'll go over in our next agenda item to help you fulfill your committee's duties, because the revenue we track separately, but the spending of general revenues is combined with property tax revenue and other general revenues. And so we hope that the scorecard that we provided will answer some questions, and we'll talk about that in the next agenda item. So with that, I will close, and this item is information only. No action is necessary, and we're available to answer any questions that you have.
I have one question. On the destination tax on a car, for instance, if I live in Loomis and I buy a car, is anything assessed to Loomis for that?
So if you buy the car at the Roseville Auto Mall, we'll get the 1% Bradley Burns sales tax. Loomis, if they have their own version of a local sales tax, they will get that local sales tax on your vehicle purchase.
Okay, thank you.
But to clarify, that's specifically the auto mall and other vehicles?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And same thing for like out-of-state purchasers. If somebody was from Nevada and they came here to buy a car at the auto mall, that gets sent to each different.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Are there any other questions from the committee? Is there any public comment or questions? Thank you for your presentation. This, as you said, this item is only for information, so no action is required. We'll now move on to agenda item 6.4, which is our year-end report, also presented by Dennis Kaufman, Assistant City Manager, Chief Financial Officer, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, Pettengill, Assistant Finance Director on the city's year-end report.
Thank you. So this item is your year-end report for fiscal year 2022-2023 that ended on June 30th of 2023. And the agenda item was hundreds of pages, as you know, and we will succinctly, as best we can, condense this presentation to provide you the information that you need to fulfill your duties. Because it is kind of a long presentation, I'd ask if you could try to keep your questions until the end, and then we'll have plenty of time to answer questions. So starting with the exhibits that are attached to your agenda item, the first item we provided was a draft of the scorecard for fiscal year 23. And like I mentioned, we provided a revised version tonight. And we have, for the public, we have extra copies of the revised version. And the version was revised because we added back the baseline year of fiscal year 2018-19, because previous committees in prior years wanted to be able to compare before Measure B to the more current budgets. And so that's what we've added in there, along with the associated analysis. Also in your packet is our year-end budget report, the council communication staff report that we provided to City Council, as well as the fourth quarter budget report itself is in your packet, which summarizes how fiscal year 23 ended and the year-end results from that budget year. We also provided in your packet the detailed general ledger report of the Measure B revenue, where you can see the budget for the revenue is approximately $28.1 million. You'll see the actual revenues came in, I believe, at $28.8 million. And then we provided copies of all of the remittance advices from the state of California, so that you have everything we can provide about the revenue details. We also provided a copy of our general fund reserves policy, because one of the components of what came out of Measure B was, in addition to restoring services and prioritizing services, was also providing stabilization reserves to maintain services during future economic downturns. So we wanted to provide you with a copy of the reserve policies. We provided the fiscal year 23 annual budget, and that is the book that's 578 pages. We wanted to make sure you had everything you needed to see in there, and I'll point you to a few key pages here in a minute. I think one of the other important things that we provided is a copy of the memo that was written last year by this committee and presented to the City Council, so that as you develop your report for this year, you'll have last year's to use as a starting point. And then finally, the city each year undergoes a number of different financial audits by independent CPA firms. It's called the Annual Comprehensive Financial Report. Our auditors are working with our staff now to finalize that report, and so we'll be providing that to this committee as soon as it is available later this month. So with that, on the next slide, we pointed out here the key pages where in the budget book we have referred to Measure B, so that you can see throughout the document where the city manager's budget message references Measure B, how Measure B is used to help maintain city services, both in the city manager's budget message, in sections of the budget talking about the general fund and its revenues and expenditures, in our department sections, particularly police, fire, and parks, recreation, and libraries. And then we also handed out to you tonight a copy of our budget in brief. That is a pamphlet version of your 600-page budget book that has, I believe, a full-page section talking about how Measure B resources have been used to help with the city's budget. Before I turn it over to Scott, I just wanted to give you a little bit of context for the fiscal year 23 adopted budget. The budget was adopted to maintain a focus on fiscal responsibility, which is one of the City Council's priorities, making sure that we align with the city's mission and our City Council's strategic plan. It has us living within our means and not relying on reserves or one-time funding for ongoing programming, which is a theme that you'll hear us talk about a little bit tonight, and that the budget provides core services to the community that are expected under Measure B. At the time that this budget was developed, this would have been back in spring of 2022, we were uncertain about the impacts of inflation at that time and the interest rate hikes and what impact they were having on the local economy. We were also concerned about the capacity for long-term growth within the city without new sources of revenue, particularly funding capital projects. This budget for fiscal year 23 reflected the Measure B priorities by ensuring that we maintain the service levels that were identified through Measure B, focusing on the high priority new services that were identified, maintaining the stabilization reserve that I mentioned, and paying down long-term liabilities, including our underfunded pension obligations. So with that context for the fiscal year 23 budget, I'll turn it over to Scott to talk more about the budget and how we ended fiscal year 23.
Excuse me. Thank you, Dennis. I'll begin with some general fund revenue highlights focused on our three largest revenue sources. In fiscal year 23, our general fund revenue budget was based on the primary assumption that our tax revenues will continue to grow just at a slower pace than the prior years. Our three largest revenue sources in the general fund are Bradley Burns sales tax, Measure B, local sales tax, and our property tax. We assumed modest growth in Bradley Burns of $74 million, which was midway between our sales tax consultants' conservative and most likely projections. Our Measure B revenues was projected to come in about $28 million, which is again midway between our sales tax consultants' conservative and most likely projections. And property tax revenue was estimated to grow about 5.9% to $64.4 million. On this next slide, we provide a pie chart of general fund revenues in total by revenue type. The general fund revenue budget totaled $211 million in fiscal year 23. As I mentioned previously, the largest revenue sources for the general fund are Bradley Burns, Measure B, sales tax, and property tax. And these revenue streams represent about 79% of all our general fund revenues. And the remaining 21% consist of about 100 revenue line items, including franchise fees for cable and electric utility for the use of the public right-of-way, charges for service, transfers in, and some other taxes and revenues. In this next graph, we provide a multi-year comparison of sales tax revenues, including the collection of Measure B in fiscal year 19, indicated by the green bar. Fiscal years 2013 through 22 in this graph reflect actual revenues collected, and then the fiscal year 23 column represents the revenue estimate included in the fiscal year 23 adopted budget of $102 million. Consisting of, as I mentioned earlier, $74 million in Bradley Burns and $28 million in Measure B. I did want to note here that you'll notice a small dip and uptick in fiscal year 18 and 19, and this is primarily due to a state software upgrade that delayed receiving some of our sales tax revenues until fiscal year 19. On this next chart, we provide a general fund expenditure overview by department. The total adopted general fund operating budget totaled $212 million. Police and fire budgets totaled $96.3 million, or $54.6 million and $41.7 million respectively, and made up about half of our general fund spending plan at 46%. The Parks, Recreation, and Libraries Department expenditure budget totaled $31.1 million and represented about 15% of the budget. And then the general government category made up 6% of our budget, and that includes departments such as our city council, city manager, city clerk, city attorney, finance, and HR departments. Development services and public works made up about 5% each of our spending plan. And then the other category, which represents about 23% of our budget, includes items that don't align nicely with any of our operating departments, includes items such as transfers to other funds, including the Economic and Stabilization Reserves, the Pension Trust Fund, and the Capital Reserve Fund. It also includes a $6 million additional discretionary payment towards our city CalPERS obligations. This next slide includes a chart in the revised draft Measure B scorecard showing fiscal year 19 as the baseline compared to fiscal year 22 and 23 adopted budgets. You'll notice that the fiscal year 23 budget in the slide of $228 million is greater than the $212 million that I referenced in the prior slide, and this is because the scorecard includes non-operating expenditures as well. General fund expenditures increased by 25% overall as compared to fiscal year 22, including one-time capital projects and investments to address the city's pension obligations. Factors contributing to this increase in the departments include labor cost increases associated with new positions that I'm going to go over a little bit more in the next slide, as well as increasing costs for labor, benefits, materials, services, and supplies. The budget in the other general fund expenditures and transfers category increased by 77%. And this is primarily due to a $10 million transfer to a new capital reserve fund for one-time capital projects and an $8 million transfer to a new pension reserve trust fund. This category also includes a capital expenditure, including $9.6 million for the Roseville Soccer Complex, which is funded by prior year budget surplus, and $1.2 million for the Hillcrest Neighborhood Roadway Resurfacing Project. The new capital reserve was created to use some of the unsustainable revenue growth for high-priority one-time projects, including advanced funding for the new Fire Station 8, instead of dedicating it to new ongoing costs. On this next slide, we show staffing levels for fiscal year 19, 22, and 23. Overall staffing increased by 5%, or 37 positions in fiscal year 23. Information pertaining to the additional positions are included in the scorecard, as well as in a lot more detail in the fiscal year 23 adopted budget document. Overall, many of the positions added to the general fund departments were related to maintaining service levels in our growing city. The most significant increases on a percentage basis was in the all other department category, which includes departments like HR, finance, as I mentioned earlier. And staffing in these departments was increased by 8 and included the addition of a deputy city attorney position, which was the first new position we added to the city attorney's office since 2007. It also includes the conversion of some of finance department positions from limited term to full-time. Staffing in the police department increased by 6%, or 13 positions, and this includes some positions to support animal control, dispatch, the body-worn camera program, and maintaining patrol staffing levels. And positions were increased by 7 or 6% in the Parks and Recreation and Libraries department. And these additions included positions to ensure quality park system turf, as well as sports fields, park maintenance positions to ensure park safety and cleanliness, a project technician to assist in the inspection of rehab and construction projects, a tree trimmer to ensure the safety of city trees, and additional staff to support the Mighty Museum and Library. Developing our general fund budget involves estimating revenues and expenditures for the upcoming year, but the process also focuses on planning for the future, using the city's financial policies as a guide. So those financial policies establish and maintain reserves to weather economic downturns or other financial impacts. The policies also reflect City Council's goal to address the city's pension liability, using the additional discretionary payment to CalPERS and a pension trust fund. On this next slide, we show the status of general fund reserves as of the fiscal year 23 adopted budget. After taking into account the growing cost of city operations and augmentations, the adopted budget included a transfer of $1.4 million in general fund resources into the stabilization reserve to achieve the City Council policy target of 15% of general fund operating expenditures. The budget also included a transfer of $1.2 million into our general fund emergency reserve to maintain the council policy target of 10% general fund operation expenditures. The purpose of the city stabilization reserve is to address revenue shortfalls caused by an economic downturn, and the purpose of the city's emergency reserve is to address expenditures necessary during an emergency. Taking an additional step to address the city's pension liabilities with CalPERS, the City Council established a strategy to address pension liabilities after general fund reserve targets are met under its strategic plan goal to remain fiscally responsible. The adopted budget included $6 million for the city's second additional discretionary payment, or ADP, to CalPERS. Based on the most recent actuarial evaluation, the city's overall CalPERS funded status ratio is about 64%, when the ideal ratio is closer to 80 to 95%. The city's total unfunded liability was $481 million, and that's the portion of the total liability that isn't currently funded. The benefits of making these additional payments include paying down the unfunded liability, increasing the funded status of the plan, and reducing future pension costs to build future capacity in the budget to maintain our city service levels. As I mentioned, the City Council established a strategy to address pension liabilities after general fund reserve targets are met. And last year, the Council approved a updated pension funding policy that includes establishment of a Section 115 pension trust fund. The Section 115 is an internal revenue code section that allows establishing a tax-exempt trust for governmental purposes. A pension trust can be used to set aside resources to meet future pension contributions or liabilities. The resources are irrevocably committed for pension obligations, and the trust can be used as a rate stabilization fund to ease budgetary pressures resulting from unanticipated spikes in required employer contribution rates from CalPERS. And the adopted budget included transferring $8 million into this pension trust fund. As I mentioned previously, the revenue estimate for Measure B in the fiscal year 23 adopted budget was $28.1 million, which equated to approximately 13% of the $212 million general fund budget. Without Measure B, essential services and programs would have faced some significant reductions. The city wouldn't have been able to establish a stabilization reserve to mitigate reductions in the short term and make fiscal health investments such as paying down our CalPERS pension obligations. So next I'll move on to our year-end results for the general fund. The general fund ended fiscal year 23 with a $14.2 million surplus consisting of approximately $5.3 million in operating revenues received above estimates and $8.9 million in expenditure savings. Fiscal year 23 saw conditions that remain unsettled coming out of the pandemic, and this included rising costs for equipment, fuel, services, supplies, materials, supply chain problems, and challenges filling of vacant positions. Sales tax revenues fell short of our budget estimates, but property tax and some other revenues, specifically those related to new development, exceeded their budget estimates, which offset that shortfall in sales tax. Overall, these positive revenue results, coupled with general fund expenditures coming in under budget, led to a net positive results and a $14.2 million one-time increase in our general fund balance. Council did provide us staff direction to come back to City Council with a plan to utilize the majority of the fund balance in the proposed budget for next fiscal year upon finalization of their City Council strategic plan session, which they conducted last week. Council did approve of the appropriation of $450,000 from the surplus to improve a high-priority park project according to the area's master plan. Drilling into our general fund revenues a little bit further, this slide provides an overview of the larger general fund revenue sources and the factors contributing to that $5.3 million in positive revenue results. Our Bradley Burns sales tax ended the year $3.3 million under estimates, and Measure B sales tax exceeded estimates by about $700,000. As we saw throughout the year, sales tax growth slowed as compared to the last couple years where we witnessed some tremendous growth. The slower rate of spending was seen in cities across California and is generally attributed to some shifting consumer behavior from spending on taxable goods to other areas that are not, that were constrained to the pandemic, such as travel. Also, there was still a great degree of uncertainty in the prior year regarding the impact of inflation, interest rates, and then also there was some concern over a potential slowdown or recession at the time. Property tax revenues exceeded estimates by $3 million, reaching $67.6 million compared to our estimate of $64 million. And this represented a 5% variance as compared to the budget and 11% increase over the prior year. These results were driven by the continued growth in residential property values and strong sales during that year. Hotel tax, or TOT, previous slide, please. Go back one. Thank you. Hotel tax, or TOT, those revenues ended the year $1.5 million above estimates, totaling $5.5 million received compared to the budget of $4 million. And the positive year-end results are primarily attributed to the passage of Measure C, which raised the TOT rate in the city from 6% to 10% in January of 2023. And lastly, the other revenues category exceeded estimates by approximately $3.4 million, primarily due to higher than anticipated building permit, plan check, engineering inspection fees, as well as interest and investment returns. On this next graph, that's included in the Measure B scorecard. It shows actual sales tax revenues received since fiscal year 19. It's a bit different than the earlier sales tax bar graph that I showed, which included a combination of actual revenues received as well as budgeted revenues. And this graph illustrates that Measure B revenues have steadily increased, enabling the city to maintain and expand service priorities to meet the needs of the city's growing population. Now move on to general fund expenditures. This slide provides the fiscal year 23 year-end expenditure results. All of our general fund departments ended the year under budget due to salary savings from vacant positions, as well as materials, services, and supply savings. You'll notice that our two largest departments, police and fire, both expended about 99% of their budgets. Overall, departments expended approximately 96% of their budgets, resulting in expenditure savings of $8.9 million after taking into account encumbrances related to service agreements that are planned to be expended in the following fiscal year. So that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'm going to hand it back to Dennis to review the draft scorecard.
Thanks, Scott. So as I mentioned, the staff have worked with the prior committee members in previous years to develop this scorecard to assist the committee in developing a report to provide to the city council. The revised draft of the scorecard we handed you tonight and we have available for the public. We've updated the scorecard this year to reflect the fiscal year 23 budget. We've used the same scoring system as we have in previous years with green, yellow, and red scoring. You'll notice that there are no yellows or reds this year as all of the measures increased with the green indicators. We included a comparison of the general fund expenditure budgets and the staffing data comparing the pre-Measure B baseline year of fiscal year 18-19 to the fiscal year 22 and 23 fiscal years. The draft also includes a summary of notable changes in the budget. I would call some of the more significant augmentations that are in the budget are all summarized for you in the scorecard, as well as a summary of the year-end results. So the scorecard also includes a summary of the investments in the general fund reserves and the bar graph that Scott just showed you of the sales tax revenue collected over time. So with the scorecard and with this kind of summary of the fiscal year 23 budget and the year-end results of fiscal year 23 and the 600 pages that we've provided you, we hope that this gives you the information that you'll need in order to review the results of Measure B as well as the general fund expenditures and staffing data. And this concludes our presentation. This item is for information only. No action is necessary. I think it's important for you to have all of the context about how the budget was developed for fiscal year 23 as you consider your year-end report. We hope that the materials in your packet provide you with the information that you need to be able to prepare your report to the City Council. And this concludes our presentation. We're available to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any comments or questions from the committee?
I have some
I know you have
questions.
some. Feel free.
Thank you. I have a couple. On the data that was presented, the one question I have is, if you look at page 3 of the scorecard, which shows the expenditures and the staffing of the general fund departments, it's notable that staffing is up 6% and expenditures are up 12%, and I'm wondering if there are some items included in expenditures. For instance, when a police staff person is added, particularly a patrolman, there's a vehicle that comes with that, isn't there? And are those vehicle costs included in the expenditures?
Yes, it would be.
Okay, so that might account for why there would be a higher increase than perhaps you might initially think there might be. It's not going to be a one-for-one comparison between an increase in expenditures and an increase in staff because of other expenses that are included.
That's correct.
Related to staff, but not payroll.
Including negotiated general wage increases or benefit cost increases, additional CalPERS contribution rates that increase. Yeah, you're absolutely right. The growth rate for adding positions would be different than the growth rate for the expenditures.
Okay, and then you answered several of my questions already, but one question that I did have, to supplement or to complement the data that we have, The priorities of our residents may change as time goes on. And at one time, we were doing customer satisfaction surveys, and I think at one time there was an expectation that they would be done every 2 years. And we did, the last one was, I believe, 3 years ago, maybe now, more than 2. Is there an intent to continue with those surveys so that we can ensure that the residents are getting the services that they are looking for? Because that was one of the main objectives of the CPAC when we conducted all of that, those meetings and all of that. It was to ensure that the priority services that the city provides match what the citizens are looking for. And so I was wondering if the survey is going to be continued.
Yeah, so the city did participate in the National Community Survey a little over 2 years ago. And this fall of 2023, in November, December timeframe, the survey was done again, and we're waiting for the results. We don't have the results yet.
Oh, good.
And then the other thing I was thinking about is some of our departments do their own surveys of their customers. And so I'm going to also reach out to our department heads and find out if there's other survey data that might be useful to the committee, that might be more frequent, that might give you some additional data as well.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions, gentlemen?
I had a question about the different score ratings for the green, yellow, and red. Would it be like if it was a yellow, would it just be if it like stayed the same from the previous year, and then red as if it decreased, or?
That I think was the design that the committee, and we actually brought in a consultant to help staff and the committee design the scorecard, and that was precisely the intent. Yellow meaning kind of no change, and red meaning things are declining. And as we've had discussions, if we did have a year when the economy wasn't growing, we could have a year where we have some yellows or potentially even some reds. And the Measure B priorities will inform the staff and the city council about, if we do have to reduce things, what things would get reduced. And the Measure B priorities would be considered as part of that deliberation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
No.
No? All right. Any public comment? As they mentioned, this is not an item that requires action, so we'll now move on to agenda item 6.5, which
right.
is staff is recommending the committee approve a motion to designate 1 or 2 committee members to prepare the committee's report to the city council. Dennis?
Yes, so this item is the final item on our agenda to determine which 1 or 2 committee members will draft the report to the city council. You'll notice on the slide we have our budget timeline. Tonight we have our first committee meeting, March 5th. And then over the course of this month, the intent is for the committee to prepare the report, which is in the form of a memo. And we did provide last year's memo so that you have a good starting point. We currently have a meeting scheduled for March 27th with the intent that the committee review a draft of the memo or report, and then with a plan to have 1 or 2 of the committee members present that report to the city council at their regular council meeting on May 1st. And then lastly, the way this committee works, we would then have you come back next February to evaluate fiscal year '24. And you see the red arrows there pointing to February and March, which is kind of where we are now, and the month of May for that council presentation, which is shortly before council has the proposed budget for next fiscal year, for fiscal year '25. I will just highlight for you that we are working on finalizing the year-end audit report. And so as I mentioned earlier, as soon as we have that, we'll provide that to the committee. And the recommendation for this item is that the committee select 1 or 2 of you to work on the memo to present the results of your evaluation to the city council on May 1st.
Thank you.
And we're available to answer any questions.
questions or comments from the committee? So to clarify, though, we need to have it at least 3 plus additional days to you guys. So it says we have through the 26th, but we really only have through like the 21st, right? Okay, so really just 2 weeks, so. So that may factor into anybody's decision-making process, so. Any other questions from the committee or comments? Any public comments? Do I have one or more volunteers that are interested in preparing the committee's report to the city council?
I'd be willing to work on that.
Thank you. Are there any other people that would be willing to volunteer to help out?
Just one.
Are you right? Yes, one more. Oh, excellent, thank you.
I mentioned, no, I think I mentioned this to you before, but I'm going to be out of town on the 27th. So.
Thank you. All right, so, and anybody else would like to volunteer?
Sure.
Thank you. So we have 2 volunteers. So do I have a motion to appoint Committee Member Kitchell and Committee Member Bennell? Am I saying that right? Bennell. As the designees to prepare the committee's report to City Council?
I so move.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second?
Thank you. So we have a motion by Committee Member Bettencourt and seconded by Committee Member Kitchell to appoint Committee Member Kitchell and Committee Member Bennell as the committee members to prepare the committee's report to the City Council. That was a lot of committees. Sorry.
Ready for roll call?
Yes, please.
Committee Member Bettencourt,
Yes.
Vice Chair Bennell. Chair Hill,
Yes.
Committee Member Kitchell,
Yes.
and Committee Member Spate.
Yes.
So the motion has passed. Thank you guys very much for volunteering to do that. And at that point, with anything else, may I have a motion for adjournment?
I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And we are adjourned at 7:08.